I'm Hayes Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Today, what we're going to be discussing, we've got a sort of a fire table chat going on here with the VRI guys. And previous shows we've talked about tenant screening, as well as we were talking about with the lawyer what to do when things go awry. So the idea here about concentrating more on proper tenant screening is so that you don't end up having to go to the RTB in the first place. So without further ado, I have Peter and Ken, both from Vancouver Rent-it, here with us, and welcome to the show. Let's figure out how to get good tenants and not end up at the RTB.
Yeah, sounds good, Hayes. Sir. Thanks for having us back, and always happy to discuss tenant screening, which is obviously a big part of our jobs.
Absolutely. It's probably the biggest, I would suggest. I mean, people always hear about the horror stories that can easily be avoided by just doing your diligence before they move in, which is, for some reason, people overlook that. I think they get like lost in the dollar bills, you know? So what are some of the methods that you guys use, like in your own personal, like, I mean, we'll go through a whole bunch of different things, but maybe we'll get right off the hop. Credit check, because every single landlord seems to ask for this and think that it's the end all be all for this. Like, do you guys use them for every time, or what's your score?
So no, I don't do a credit check every time. If the client asks for a credit check, I will wait until we've kind of shortlisted one or two applicants, usually just one, the person that we're basically going to accept pending the credit check. Mm-hmm. And then I'll, go for a credit check on the tenant. Usually I'll also ask the tenant and say, do you want to just provide your Credit Karma, screenshot or something like that, just to make it a little more casual, as opposed to, you need to give me your whole Equifax history. Now, I have done that before. Some clients look for that. It's very important to them. And some clients are not interested in the credit check. Yeah. Personally, I think it can be a useful tool, but it's not something that I feel the need to do, blanket every single tenant with.
Yeah, for sure. Like, what are you thinking, Ken?
Yeah, it's case by case. I mean, in my experience, it is not the NLB. A lot of times, people from out of town, or out of state, or even overseas, they come into the city without having credit check done because they don't have credit, point blank in Vancouver. So asking for this as a mandatory requirement to rent is a little irrelevant. We are starting to see a lot of banks like BMO or RBC, they're allowing users to go on online portals and they can pull a soft credit check. It's an aggregate score of all their accounts, and it doesn't hurt their credit score. So it is, to some extent, some justification that they have some money on hand, they don't have too much debt. And it builds the aggregate score for whoever's looking at that that account, that person.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same way, especially when people offer to bring in their own credit check. I find it's almost like a bit of a gate. So if I ask, hey, can you provide a credit check? And I'm like, hell yeah, no problem, here you go. Then it shows you, like, if the person is like, oh, I don't know about that, all of a sudden it's like a bit of a flag, It's like,
if they're willing to play ball right off the beginning and say, here's the credit check for me, no problem, then that's definitely a good sign.
Exactly. I mean, to what you're saying, if there's some red flags or speed bumps when you do ask, like, might not have this, or hey, by the way, I got to disclose this to you, then it may be of consideration that they might not be the best candidate.
Yeah.
But again, it's case by case. Everybody has their own personal finance history that may be good or maybe bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially I find the people coming from the service industry, which is one of the places that I came from, like a lot of us didn't have any credit. I knew a couple of people who didn't have even a credit card because you're leaving with 300, 400 cash a night. Why the hell do I need a credit card? I've got cash, right? So that's sort of one of those things that sort of, I think it depends on a case-by-case basis, and I fully agree that I don't think that the credit check is the end-all, be-all to determine that, because otherwise that's all anyone would run, and they would not bother with anything else.
Yeah, I also think it's super dependent on the property that you're renting out.
Yeah.
If you're renting out a super luxury property, maybe it's a little more important. If you're renting out a $1,700 basement suite, obviously it's important to have your ducks in a row in terms of the tenant screening for that.
Yeah.
But the person renting a $1,700 basement suite may not have the greatest credit in the world, and that might be something that you either look past, or maybe that's something that you take issue with. So,
and to your point, like some of my best tenants, they didn't have good financial literacy. They screwed up when they were younger, and they were very upfront with disclosing with us. But when at the time of signing or at the time of renting, they proved to us or to myself that they were qualified, and so it kind of tells you that not everybody is perfect. And you can't judge everybody by the same methods. Some of the best tenants are people who didn't have good credit score, but eventually found responsibility. And then some of the worst tenants have perfect credit scores. So,
Exactly.
Who's to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I said that we would probably be sharing some war stories. I mean, the one that I screwed up the most was the one that ended up turning into a brothel, and that guy actually we did a credit score on him. He had great credit for it.
Exactly.
I guess he was making some extra coin. You know what I mean? But I mean, we'll get more into that later about the war stories, because I'm sure you guys got a couple of ones where things go awry every once in a while. I mean, you only hear about the planes that crash. I'm sure that the other hundreds of properties that we manage are all fine. But every once in a while, humans do crazy shit sometimes, and you're just like, what happened? Right? So yeah, it's interesting too. Like, we use that application form because we're professionals, but I think that more DIY landlords should use application forms, and most of them don't. And it's interesting. You'd think that they just email them just a list of questions, but a lot of them seem to just kind of, as I said, shoot from the hip. And I think that when they end up in these problems, it might be just from not the foresight to ask basic questions. Where do you work? What is your current landlord? All this sort of stuff, and follow them up, of course. Do you think that there's any really important questions that all landlords should have on their application form, or should they just rip off ours?
Honestly, I mean, I really like ours. I think it asks a good amount of questions. I think you don't want to ask, so many questions that it makes it difficult for the people to for the prospective tenants to fill out the application, because you don't want that to be a barrier to entry. I'm sure there's lots of tenants that are putting in several applications at once at times, and they might not want to fill out a 1-hour questionnaire about every single little detail, and 10 of their past landlords, and 5 of their past employers and stuff like that, because that information's, in my opinion, largely irrelevant. But for sure, asking some questions about their current rental history and their current employment is extremely important.
Absolutely.
Those two kind of questions: where do you live right now, and can I talk to your current landlord? And where do you work right now, and can I see some sort of proof of your employment? Those are in my opinion, the more important things to ask.
We seldom forget that. We often forget that we're all bound by rules. We can't ask certain specific questions.
Oh, absolutely.
There's certain things you just can't ask. Yeah. So, from experience, I'm sure all of us will agree. We have found ways to obtain information to the best of our ability to report back to our landlords in order to build an aggregate character application of a person without having to ask specifics, right? I don't know about you guys, but some landlords, those that do it themselves, or those that come to us thinking that they have a certain way of controlling what we can and cannot do, or maybe they request specifics that we should ask tenants. Mm-hmm. Some of the things they're asking is illegal. Frankly speaking, it's illegal.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've had a few landlords try to ask stuff about race and stuff like that. I'm like, need damn business, man. We're a multicultural place, man. We can't go be judging things on race and stuff. It's just not ready to go here. So yeah, I fully know what you mean. You have to just ask the questions that you actually need to know. Yeah. I think one of the ones that's also important is to ask the amount of occupants, the sheer number of it.
That's a very important one.
Because as the prices get up, which we cover in every stat show, the last podcast we did the stats on, I mean, they're generally always going up. And so people are having to get a little bit more creative. So we kind of have to look at that and make sure that it adheres to the bylaws too in the buildings, because like a bunch of them, have 4 occupants only limits, for a 2-bedroom. So if somebody wants to put a 5th, no can do. Right?
Yeah, it's a legitimate question, right? I mean, that's one of the starting points of my conversation with tenants. I ask them how many occupants they're looking to rent with, when they're looking to rent, and then any pets.
Yeah,
it's a very standard questionnaire.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a good segue into the interview process. Like, as Peter, you and I covered on the show a couple shows ago, basically, like when people come in for the unit, it's kind of an interview. You have to sort of ask them and get your feel on them, and see if you like this person.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Yeah. It's interesting too. As I said, I also came from dealing in the casinos and the poker rooms for many years, and so I have a pretty good ability to read people. So you kind of want to gauge that, especially as us being a landlord. You want to make sure that you like this person, because you're going to be in bed with them for like a year minimum.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely a consideration, and we're talking about the application process, but the application process, quote unquote, technically for me at least, starts the first email from the tenant. I take a look at the email, the way they wrote the email. Honestly, something that I do, which might be kind of weird and overkill, is every single person who comes through my inbox, anybody who sends and I see their full name, I'll just Google their name and take a quick look. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who have popped up on CTV News being arrested for something or breaking the law in some capacity. And sometimes maybe it doesn't matter, but there's definitely been some people who have reached out to me for a rental, and I've Googled them and seen tons of stuff and just gone, nope, not even going to bother being in the same room as this person.
Yeah, I fully agree, because I tell people this all the time when tenants ask, how do I set myself different from other applicants? Treat it like an interview, treat it like a job interview. Would you come in, wearing certain attires or not prepared, asking what the listing price is when you're already in the property? That shows me, obviously, you haven't done your research, you haven't shown sincerity, or you're just shopping around, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially one of the ones that always irks me is when you get the first response and they say, "What is the address?" It's like, it's the first damn line on my ad. Like, why are you trying to give me $3,000 for a rental unit that you don't know where it is? That's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, mind you, we're here to help. We're very courteous people. We're professionals. We're not here to belittle people or say certain things about how one might act. But they have to play the part. It's a two-way street, right? If we're going to do business together, it's a two-way street. I'm going to put my best foot forward. I expect you to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, Peter, that you mentioned that you Google them. I Google them. I Google their phone number. I Google their landlord, because I've run into a couple times where their quote-unquote landlord, you'll find them on social media like holding hands.
It's like a friend of theirs or something like that.
Yeah.
I actually did have that happen once. They gave a landlord reference, and it seemed legitimate. I looked up the person, and it seemed legitimate. But then I looked on the website of the prospective tenant where he said that he worked, and one of the people who was part of the team was, one of his coworkers. And I thought, maybe it's possible that his coworker's renting to him, or maybe it's just one of his buddies, posing as a landlord. So,
and that's where you kind of you got to delve in there. You know what I mean? And social media is a great thing to go looking up on it, and you'll find people leave the craziest stuff on social media sometimes. And you just think, what are you doing?
Especially on Facebook Marketplace. Marketplace.
So
now, lots of people have a separate profile or a closed profile where you can't really see anything. But if people are messaging you for a property on Facebook Marketplace, and you see, you can see some crazy stuff, like you said. And maybe people don't realize it's there. Maybe they don't care. But I care, and my clients would maybe care. So I usually, shy away from those sorts of tenants.
Building on what you said, if you disrespect the landlord references their friend, the best way I would do is I would call them and ask specific questions that they may or may not be able to answer. And depending on how they answer, you'll kind of get an idea whether or not they're BSing.
Yeah, absolutely. And throw out a couple red herrings when you're doing the checks never hurts, because then you can see if they're just giving you a shine on or what are they doing, you know?
Exactly. If they're very brief, like yes.
If they just say yes to every single question.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
I could say yes too, right?
Yeah. Oh, is he moving in with his girlfriend? And they say yes, and he's moving in as a single occupant. Well, maybe they don't. Maybe the landlord reference has no idea really. Really what the situation is.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing too, I find with the landlord reference is if you're starting to suspect that it might be just a friend or whatnot, I go ahead and pull a title search. Like, because we have both licenses, it's pretty easy. We're used to doing that. So you just go and pull the license for $15.
Yeah.
Why not find out if they own the place? That way at least it's a better idea if they are, and if they're not, then it's like, so you're renting to your friend, but you don't own the place.
But you don't own it. Yeah.
That seems a little suspect, right? So you can start delving in. And ultimately with the interview process, if your belly is saying something, listen to it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I've definitely been wrong about people. I've definitely seen somebody online and then gone to meet them and then thought, oh, that person was actually super nice and I didn't expect it, right?
Yeah.
But I've more often than not, if I meet somebody 5 minutes in, I can generally tell if this person applies, would I want to accept them? Yes or no? And, it's pretty successful. You can usually tell within a couple minutes of meeting somebody.
For sure, right?
There is also the unfortunate human aspect of this whole application process. If somebody is trying their best to dupe you, they're going to find a way to lie to you.
Yeah.
And, we are 99% accurate, I would say. The 1% is uncontrollable.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been caught at least one at a time. You know what I mean? No one can be flawless.
Exactly. It's the 100% guarantee.
Yeah. And going back to the trusting your belly thing, every time that I've gone against it, like they look great on paper, everything lines up, awesome credit score, blah, blah, blah. Every time I've gone against my belly, I've ended up paying for it.
In some way.
In some way, whether it be, your own energy or just stress.
Yeah, I don't mean pay as in like throwing out cash.
For sure. No, for sure.
Definitely you end up with like a harder time or end up at the RTB or
something.
It's not a smooth run.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm sure that both of you guys at least once.
Cost of business.
Yeah. It just depends. Also, something to consider sometimes is that some of my clients, they want the price to be so high that we really only get one application. And then when we only get one application, well, they seem pretty good, I guess, because we don't have anything to compare it to. And then the client goes, oh, sure, that person seems fine, even though, maybe it would be nice to have a couple different options.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets bad, is when you get desperate or the client gets a little desperate and just kind of grabs onto the first tenant that comes along. And that's definitely when you can get in trouble. And maybe a little bit of the tenant screening goes out the window when they go, that person's fine. They can start September 1st. Perfect. Great. Yeah.
If there's some questions, like especially if they're suddenly moving, it's part of the process. And we'll get into some of the questions and stuff that you should ask a current landlord when you're calling them, because if they're going to book it on their first landlord, they're 100% going to do the same to you. You'd be arrogant to think that that's not going to happen.
Just to finish off on Peter's note, it's a balancing act. The way I approach my business is really I include the landlord through the process of screening, so that way they understand from the get-go that at the end of the day they make the final decision. I take them through the process, but we're in it together, so there's no finger blaming. Like what Peter said, if it's a very specific unique property where we only really get one applicant, I do my due diligence best I can. I give my advice. At the end of the day, the landlord is the one that's deciding.
Yeah,
I'm deciding with the landlord, but they're the ones that pull the trigger. So if something goes south, we're in it together. It's not, hey Ken, you chose the bad tenant, and it's all on you.
Yeah, what's one of the ones that blew up in your face?
It's too many, man.
It's too many. We've been at this for a long ass time.
Okay, one that blew up in my face was a property in Gastown. Not the nicest area, to be honest. Bit of a seedy area, and I'd rented out a couple other units in the building, and also had issues dealing with the types of people who were interested to apply.
Yeah.
Anyways, I accepted this one guy, and guy was nice. Guy previously lived in North Van, which is where I live. Grew up there, found all his social media, seemed like a regular dude. And then 1 month into the tenancy, got a big note from the strata. He was Airbnb-ing the place, and he said he was renting it to his brother or something. We went back and forth. To be honest, to this day, I've never found out exactly what happened. He ended up just moving out after a month without, just did a midnight move. But it was a huge, huge headache. And yeah, I don't really know what really went wrong. There wasn't really any red flags there. It just kind of was one of those ones that on paper, the guy seemed, he didn't seem incredible, but he seemed for sure good enough. Yeah. And for sure good enough. Job checked out. His landlord reference, I don't specifically remember if it was super good or, but it was definitely good enough to, pass it along to the owner and for him to be accepted. And the owner, like Ken was saying, the owner was definitely a part of the decision. We had a couple other applications, and this was the one that the owner selected. And this guy just turned out to be a bad egg.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
right? Yeah, it's funny with the Airbnb ones because that's like kind of the scourge in the rental market, especially because the building finds the owner, not the tenant, right? So if you know that you're going to be getting kicked out anyways because you're Airbnb the rental that you're not supposed to be Airbnb, why would you not just stack up that and disappear into the night, right?
Yeah, the Airbnb fines are $1,000 for every instance, whatever an instance is. And an instance could be the building manager sees one person for 2 days and then sees a different person for 2 days. That's $2,000 right there. Yeah. Sees another person for 2 days. Oh, that's $3,000. So it can rack it up extremely quickly. And obviously the tenant can just disappear into the wind, and the owners can be on the hook for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I find it a lot of times though that when you're dealing with the stratas, because I've had to break up one in Richmond before, and if they see that you're doing everything you can within the rules, because that's the other crazy part about it, is that they're still protected by the residential side, even though you need a license in Vancouver. Not that anyone has one, but you need a license in Vancouver to run an Airbnb. So would that be commercial? Like it's just nuts because Airbnb wasn't around when they wrote the laws, right? So they need to update that.
Speaking about my example, I was lucky the guy just left, because if I had tried to evict him and he didn't want to be evicted, he could have stayed for 5, 6, 7 months. Yeah. Right. So, these things, they're very rare, but they do happen. And obviously it's our job to try and, mitigate that from the start, but also, we know how to deal with it kind of if it does happen, and know of ways to expedite the process, the RTB process, if you can even call it expediting. But
I do find that the ratio is less and less now. I mean,
definitely.
In the last 5 to 7 years, there were a bit more, but in recent years, it's becoming less and less, just because tenants don't have the appetite for it. They don't have the risk tolerance for it, and also for us, I mean, really, there's a lot of barriers before it gets to that extent where we have to evict people now, right? So it's just very looked down on. It doesn't happen too often, but it still will happen. It's one of those things where some schmuck might think he's smart and he wants to make a quick buck and do what I guess in your unit what he did, and just take off in the middle of the night.
Yeah,
and we don't really know if he's actually doing it, but we're left with a fat bill.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I dealt with the one, because when I first contacted him, he tries to tell me that they're not Airbnb-ing it. I'm not calling random tenants like using this. So I essentially had to explain to him, like, dude, I'm looking at your posting on Airbnb, and lo and behold, this is how much of a donkey this guy was, is that he used the photos that I used on the unit.
Funny. That's so funny.
They're my photos, bro.
Very entrepreneurial of him.
Oh yeah, right? Well, that's one of the risks with furnished units, right? Like it's a turnkey business for someone wanting to run that. So the way I ended up dealing with him after he came on side, because I was concerned about him just running it. So what I explained to him is that if you continue to run this, like, I'm already putting in the paperwork to evict you type of thing, but I can also do 24-hour notices because we're property managers. I got all day for this, right? Mm-hmm. So I basically told them, like, if you keep on doing it, I'm going to meet every guest you have. Like, I'll be coming in and visiting all the time. Yeah. Your star rating will plummet. So don't even bother.
That's actually a really good point. I didn't really consider that for Airbnbs, but obviously the money would stop flowing pretty quickly if if they had a 1-star rating, because the property manager, who's not actually the person Airbnb-ing it, kept coming in to do inspections and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that it didn't progress, but I was like kind of joking around with my mom that saying like it would be really funny to just come in like different costumes, like come with a towel wrapped around you and a shower cap on and shit. You know what I mean? Like, who is this maniac? Why is he in my place?
Sometimes you have to get creative, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? One of the things that I think is interesting too that a lot of landlords miss as well is checking the proof of ID. And it's funny, like we all ask, we have that in our application that we want, a license or a passport or whatever, that so many people actually don't follow up and check, because how do you know who's coming?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, just so everybody is aware, legally speaking, we are not allowed to hold a copy of anybody's ID.
Correct. Yeah, that's actually
you have to look at it.
We are allowed to look at it. We cannot take photos or keep a copy of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But that being said, to your point, Hayes, you'd be stupid not to look at people's IDs.
Yeah.
They could tell you their name is Joe Smith, and you're really going to sign a contract based on what they tell you or what they write down on the application. No, of course you want to check who they are. And also, most people have middle names. And when you have middle names, if you're very thorough with your contract, you want to write the middle names. In the event you go to RTB or anything like that, or you want to check a soft criminal check on them, you need middle names.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to make sure you get as much information prior and verify the information. That's the big part.
For sure.
Actually double check things, right? Because especially as you said, people are going to try and date you. They're going to put up a couple of ways to get around it, but chances are they'll miss something.
Yeah. Thankfully, for my business, I haven't really been affected by fraudulent IDs. I don't think people are ballsy enough to go ahead and do fake IDs and rent properties, but I'm sure there's people out there that have done it, and just I guess knock on wood, we don't ever experience that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I haven't run into any of that. So far, everybody's ID is matched.
Yeah,
contracts. So much, but it's just like something you need to check just in case, right? So you want to make sure about that. So now we did talk about speaking with the previous landlord. So you're calling away, obviously we're going to verify everything. What are some of the questions that you ask the current or previous or soon to be previous landlord to make sure that your tenant is going to be a solid one?
To be honest, kind of depends on the flow of the conversation, but one of the more important points I find is that maybe people might forget is in a stratified property asking about any violations, even if they're super minor. Somebody might say, oh, did they pay rent on time? That's great, right? But if the person, maybe they did pay rent on time a bunch, they paid rent on time every time, but they put the recycling in the garbage can 10 months in a row and racked up thousands of dollars of fines. That's also possible. Or maybe they sped through the gate, the parking garage without stopping, which is also another thing that you can be fined $200 for. So these little things, it might not be a make or break scenario, but if the property manager or the previous landlord says, yeah, they were a great tenant, I guess, but they racked up all of these fines, and maybe they paid them, right? Maybe they paid them at the end of the day, but it's still annoying to deal with, and you don't want to have those conversations. So kind of knowing how they lived in a stratified condo is important for me, at least.
Yeah. What about you, Ken?
I mean, I definitely am a big believer, to ask the landlords if they were provided proper notice. It's a courtesy, because a lot of times we get landlord reference calls from new landlords, and we're not notified by our tenants in advance. Right? I mean, for the most part, it's fine. I get that the market itself is very competitive, and people may not have the time to give it a heads up, right? So for the most part, I do provide the landlord references regardless. But if I was the landlord in receiving it and my tenant hasn't provided me proper notice, and they're getting this phone call, they're obviously going to be taken back by surprise, and they may not provide the information that you want to hear, right? And to your point, also, it really depends on the flow of the conversation. I generally let the landlords speak, right?
Oh yeah.
I want to know what they have to say, their tone of voice. Are they going to elaborate, or are they going to just keep everything very, 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 very succinct, right? If it's to the point, yes, no, maybe. Well, no, they're not really giving me much information to work off of.
Yeah.
So by then, I will make my own decision based on that conversation with the landlord. And when the tenant comes back and says, "Oh, have you spoken to my landlord?" We'll have that conversation with the tenant then. Like, "Hey, look, I spoke to the landlord, but to be honest, or with all due respect, they didn't seem like they were too eager to provide me a landlord reference, etc., etc." And then kind of elaborate more from there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other ones that I ask about as well is how they were with maintenance. Like, sometimes you can't get something fixed right now. Mm-hmm. So were they respectful of that, understanding that, especially when we just came through like the COVID times there, like getting a new dishwasher took a while sometimes because they just simply weren't there.
Yeah.
So I want to know basically, how was the tenant as far as maintenance? Were they respectful of timelines? Did they understand that? Would they let the repair person in? I mean, that's past COVID now, but I mean, now currently, if we have to send over an electrician or a appliance person or whatnot, they need to let them in.
Yeah.
And so you need to ask those, especially as well with things such as the mandatory building checks, when they come in and check the fire stuff.
Yeah.
We deal with a lot of stratified, so that's coming in. If somebody's dealing with a basement suite or whatnot, obviously they
not as important.
Yeah, because you can just kind of handle that stuff, right? But you want to make sure that they're willing to play along. And obviously, of course, you're asking, did they take care of the property and stuff like that?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like paying for the rent and taking care of the property is kind of just a given. Like usually if I call somebody, they're usually just going to tell me that information. And then if I want additional information, I'll have to ask specific questions. Sometimes though, previous landlords are super talkative. They're so chatty, and that's usually good.
Yeah.
Most of the, if I can just sit back, like Ken was saying, sit back, and they're just going to ramble on about the tenant, whether it be good or bad. I can get a lot of information from that. Mm-hmm. There's also one thing that I love hearing from current landlords is when they say, "Oh, I wish the tenant wasn't leaving."
Oh, absolutely.
Whenever I hear that, I'm like, okay, sign them up right away. They're probably going to be fantastic, right? Like 99.999% of the time, if you hear that is like the best possible thing to hear.
Yeah.
The current landlord, especially if they're another property manager, and they're like, "That person was so great.
Yeah.
I just wish they were staying forever." Like that's always nice to hear.
Yeah, especially like one of my last questions that I always ask them after going through my battery of other ones is, would you rent to them again? And it's usually when you get that answer. And even then, sometimes you'll hear that maybe, like, oh, hold on, why the hesitation here? Like, let me hear the rest of your story, kind of thing. So, yeah, there's there, and I also, with the landlords as well, I also like throwing out some red herrings there as well. So sometimes I'll just deliberately get the address wrong and see if they just roll.
Oh yeah, absolutely, exactly. Sometimes, actually, a lot of times people don't even put the unit address, right? So when I call to get the landlord reference check, I ask the landlord themselves what unit number they are, or I like you said, say the wrong number and then have them correct us, right? So it's we're fishing as well. I mean, we're asking questions, but we're also fishing for a reason to say no.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
The only thing with doing that is I have run into a couple of cases, not super often, but run into a couple of cases where I say, "Oh, and can you just confirm what the rent amount was," or something like that, and they go, "Oh, I can't reveal that." Sure, okay. Like as if I actually care what the real rent amount was. Come on, right? Or they say, I say, "Can you confirm the unit number?" And they, "Oh, no, I can't reveal that information." I guess.
Red flag.
Yeah, that's definitely a flag. All of a sudden, like, whoa, right? So yeah, it's funny that you're talking about that. You just let them speak. My grandmother, when she was alive, gave me the advice that you have 2 ears and one mouth. Which one do you use more often? I was like, that's pretty good advice.
Very good advice.
Very good advice.
Yeah.
Ironically, being that we're just sitting here talking and talking and talking.
Yeah.
So what can you do?
Yeah.
Now, the rent-to-income ratio across Canada is normally about 30%. Obviously, that does not really fly out here in the greater Vancouver area. Do you guys have a hard and fast number, or how do you guys determine what a good ratio is, what a good number is?
Honestly, it's super rare that the income even comes into play for me. I find that if they're applying for the property and that I've shown them the property, they can afford it. Do you know what I mean? I just mean like that. I don't get very many applications from people who are just like so far off that they just can't afford it. It just doesn't happen very often. Like most of the time, if they've answered my questions they seem like a nice person, and I've shown them the property. They're already, that's not kind of the issue at hand. It's whether they're going to be a good tenant or not. It's not really the money issue. That being said, I have run across people who are well below, or they are spending too much. The place is well, outside their budget. 40%, 45%.
Right.
I've even seen like 50%, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
Because that's your gross income, right? That's not even accounting for taxes and So that doesn't come into play that often, honestly. But yeah, I'd say 40% probably maximum.
Yeah.
For me personally. But I've even had clients say, "Hey, I won't accept anybody above 25." And
I know it's
one specific one that
they're very methodical.
Yeah.
They would not budge.
I did have one client that was very, very specific and methodical, and they weren't wrong at all. It was a little frustrating trying to find
their standard.
The perfect tenant, but they had very high standards, and I couldn't fault them for it.
Yeah.
They said 25% basically.
I mean, as long as they're okay with the place being vacant.
100%.
Like that's what drives me nuts is when they give you like crazy amount of things that they need or want,
but they need it rented in a week.
Exactly. It is like something's going to have to give here, guys.
No, I tell tenants this. It's to everything we're talking about right now. I tell them, in order for me to facilitate pushing your application through, you got to help me help you.
Yeah.
If you're not giving me numbers to work with, if you're not giving me information that I can supply the landlord to make a sound decision, you're not doing anybody justice. You calling me every day, hey, how's my app? Am I going to get an answer soon? It's just not going to work, right? So to your point, what income ratio, there really isn't one. I mean, once upon a time, they said it was 30%. You shouldn't spend anything more than 30% income. But in today's time, it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to bridge that gap, more and more, I'm asking people, look, whatever you're comfortable with, exclude any sensitive information. Show me some savings. Show me some assets. Show me something that you're comfortable with to make the landlord feel comfortable about possibly choosing you, right?
Oh yeah.
If you're just showing me your pay stubs, but the rent itself doesn't. It's like 2x your monthly income or whatever it is. It's not gonna fly.
Yeah.
Right? You got to show other assets. I think most people who do apply, they understand that a single income nowadays, it doesn't work anymore. They got to have some savings. They got to have some investments going and stuff like that to kind of show financial literacy.
Yeah.
Which is interesting too, because I've seen some landlords and they're uncomfortable with like a boyfriend-girlfriend situation. And I'm going like, you have two incomes. The likelihood of both of these guys getting fired at the same time is probably not very
lower
high.
than just one of them. Yeah, exactly.
Right? So, I mean, I like to see two incomes coming in because then we know like, for sure we're going to be in good shape, and the likelihood of somebody going down, both of them losing their job at the same time, is not
much more unlikely.
So,
yeah, I mean, if I wasn't able to accept couples, I would not have very many tenants.
Yeah.
Because most of my tenants are, even in one bedrooms and studios, are still these days are still couples.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to post a couple. I think some landlords may have some consensus. They don't want new couples, like brand new, we're moving in for the first time, because sometimes relationships don't last. But at the same time, that's just like anything else in life, right? Nothing is forever. And there's risks. Right? We take risks going out every day, right? So what's to say that a relationship might not work out? I
actually have a story that just happened about that. So I was showing a very nice $4,500 2-bedroom suite unit downtown. Very nice, and I showed it to lots of different people, but one of the people was a couple, and they came in, and they seemed like they'd been together a very long time.
Yeah.
And this was maybe in May or June, so not very long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I just showed the guy another unit.
Yeah.
And he was just him by himself, and I recognized the name, and I said, when he walked in, I said, hey, I think we've met before. You saw a unit, a couple months ago. And he said, yeah. And I said, just out of curiosity, is it just for yourself today? Are you just looking for yourself to move in? And he said, yeah, just me.
Okay.
So if I had they didn't end up applying to the 2-bedroom unit, but if they had, maybe the writing was already on the wall. Maybe they would have broken up 2 months later. I'm not sure. So who knows? But it was interesting seeing him, not very much time had gone by since he was looking for a super expensive 2-bed, and now he was just looking for a more modest 1-bed.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because he broke up with his girlfriend. So,
yeah, it's funny too. One of the other questions to ask the landlords is when you're renting one with pets. is you have to ask about the pet. And I just find, because everyone seems to be worried about pets, and I personally prefer to rent to groups with pets because, one, you get a second deposit because half a month in today's day, you ain't going nowhere with half a month. There's nothing going on. I mean, handyman is like $300 to show up. They haven't even swung a hammer yet, right? Yeah. So that's one of the cases, as well as when you're going to be allowing for a pet to come in. Like, you want to know the age of the pet. Was it good in the other place? You know, obviously a 2-year-old dog over a puppy would be easier. Because I mean, I think, Ken, you had one where a puppy was eating a windowsill or something.
Oh, that was a long time ago. I mean, a puppy was chewing baseboards up.
Yeah, that's going to add up real fast, right?
That was a mess. That story was a mess. Like, they had a dog and a cat. The cat was fighting with the dog every day, and the cat was clawing at doors, and then the dog was peeing and also chewing up baseboards.
Wow,
that was a huge mess.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of those things that you have to make sure that you do your checks. Like, if you have a place with a pet, make sure you check in on it. I mean, you should be checking in on your rental in general to stop things ahead of time, like hoarding and stuff like this. But I've seen so many cases where people complain about, oh, I had a pet in one of my units before and they trashed the place, blah, blah. And like, you didn't notice this happening over 2 years?
Yeah, it's not like the pet does it, in the first week of moving in. I mean, possibly, but it is possible, but usually it would take a while for that sort of thing to happen. So you should see maybe some signs of it.
Exactly. It's the detect and correct, basically, right? Like, make sure you check in on your rental unit, because it's just a maintenance thing, right? And this is, again, a lot of landlords, I find when we get a new property, they haven't been doing that at all. And that's one of the benefits, I guess, of using a professional, because as I said earlier, we got all day. Yeah. We can show up and check on places for sure, like it should be done. Not to mention for insurance. Yeah. Because a lot of them want checks, some of them even as much as every 2 months, which is insanity. But
yeah, there's a couple of properties I check out every 3 months for insurance purposes.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is quite a bit, and can, I guess, maybe feel a little invasive for the tenant, but
absolutely,
it's part of the deal. So
yeah, I usually find when you have those ones with the really high insurance, like with the check-ins, that's really short times, is that if you're transparent with the tenant, then they're a little bit understanding. Do you know what I mean?
As long as they don't think it's because you don't trust them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You just come in, it's like, the guy's insurance says, I have to do this every 3 months. Sorry, I'm just going to pop in, do this, get out of here. It's not you, type of thing, right?
Yeah. Going back to the thing about the pets, with the kind of getting more information about the pet, I find that the best kind of pet owners are the ones that they send a little cute little bio for their dog or whatever with a little picture and stuff like that. If the people go to the trouble of making the little, bio for Baxter the dog, they probably care a little more than somebody who's just like, I have a pet and I want them to be in the unit with me, right? So for me personally, and for some owners, that goes a long way of just showing, that the person is a responsible pet owner. I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing too, now we were talking earlier about checking out the employment. So when you call an employer, what are some of the questions that you ask there?
For me personally, just ask them whether or not they're fully employed, a contract, or what their status is. Right? It's very important because a lot of times people are on probation or they're on a contract that ends in a year. Right? Yeah, that would matter as well, because in a year time they may take flight, they might go somewhere else, might be relocated, or they might not have a job.
Yeah, absolutely. I find also as well that you have to really listen to the employer. So if they're like, oh yeah, Ken, or like, oh, Peter, like, you're just like, more questions need to be asked on Peter's for sure. Right? So, that not throwing you into the bus a little bit.
No problem.
Totally just
exactly. Yeah. I mean, income wise, it's most people don't lie about it. Same as the employer, like they'll kind of. They'll tell you when it's written down. Most people don't lie about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing too as well, that you have to take into account that with the privacy laws and all that, like, certain employers won't want to give you too much. And so I think at least on the employment one, you got to be a little bit more understanding, a little bit looser. kind of thing.
Yeah, I usually just check to confirm their employment. Because especially, if somebody sends an employment letter and pay stubs and all this stuff and bank statements that show the transactions coming in, to be honest, usually don't call up the employer and confirm.
Yeah.
You should take those at face value. But if the person provides, like a check from somebody or something like that, there's definitely
or a
screenshot. There's definitely different levels of employment confirmation.
Yeah.
And if I feel a little, unsure about it, then giving the employer a quick call and just having them confirm employment seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea to confirm that. And to touch on your one about the contracts, if they're permanent or if they're in probation or whatnot, I also ask when their contract's going to end. Because, if they are ending in a month, then you need to start asking other questions. Do you think you're going to have them back? They may or may not answer this, of course, but you want to make sure that you are making sure this person's going to stay employed.
For sure. And I think it also really depends on the industry as well. For instance, film. In film, I know I've got a couple tenants who they'll work for 6 months and then not work for 6 months.
Yeah. And
sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But other people perhaps they will other people will find a new contract very quickly in different industries. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer and sometimes it doesn't, but it's definitely a good question to ask.
Yeah. I also ask how long they've been with the company. If obviously if they're past probation, how long they've been there. Because obviously somebody who's been there for 3 or 4 years probably is fairly well established. So
I find that more and more landlords, they're asking questions such as, the tenants, like visa status, or if they're PRs or if they're citizen, etc. It's a bit sensitive. A lot of times I try not to dig further into people's status per se, but they are becoming more and more legitimate questions because if someone had to work permit for 2 years, right? I think usually they're granted 2 year permits, right? Some landlords may take into consideration what happens after that 2 year period, right? Will they go back? Are they going to stay? Are they applying for PR? Some employers are reluctant to help them with that process, so that's also something to take into consideration. They're only here for 24 months and then they're gone.
Yeah, although I find some landlords almost prefer that turnover because as the rents, of course, go up, then they can jump back into the market and be like, I can collect the extra $200 now or whatever amount that it went up. Yeah. It seems to go up almost like $100 a month, which is absolutely insane. But
on my front, more people they're more concerned about people taking off before, or just right before their V6 expires. So they're more caring on that front. They want people to stay longer. They don't want people to up and go.
In a lot of cases, I find that people offer to be like a guarantor. So when you get the offer of a guarantor, what are some of the things you check on the guarantor?
The same thing as it would for another or for just the tenant, but you can be a little more in depth. I know we recently did one where we pulled title on the person's house, which is always good because it means if you go after if you need to go after the guarantor, I think you used the term, there was a little bit of juice to squeeze or something like that. So that's good. I that definitely made the client, at least in that case, feel very comfortable and confident moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because it's just additional guarantee, which is where the word comes from.
Look at you learning things today. Yeah, I think that a lot of people need to use pulling title more often for things. For the $15 that it costs, you can do it down at Land Titles. You can do it online. Why would you not do that? $15 to have that peace of mind is a really good thing. I mean, we pull title on all the landlords that we work for as well to make sure they own it, right? Because you get yourself in a heap of trouble if you don't be working for the right person, right? So I think that it's really an underused thing that a lot of the DIY landlords should just, if it has application, obviously, to pull it for, especially for case of a guarantor, because it's interesting too. With some people who offer to be a guarantor, and then when you tell them, like, okay, well, I'm going to put you on the contract then. Oh, no. So it's like you guarantee them, but not enough to put yourself on the line.
Not legally, just a little handshake.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's like
just to soften up.
Yeah, right. So that's sort of like
service.
For me, that's a red flag as well.
For sure.
Trust your friend, but not enough to put your neck out for. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know about this one.
Yeah,
Right.
but I definitely don't mind a guarantor situation at all, and I think a lot of clients don't mind either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems relatively reasonable to me.
Mm.
Mostly for people who are a little bit younger, maybe. I haven't really had any issues with like UBC students or anything like that with a guarantor.
Yeah,
haven't really had any issues.
Yeah, when done correctly, it's a leg up for the applicant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are also concerned about having out-of-town people coming, like students, for instance, as you just touched on.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they don't have the credit and all this stuff, and they've come usually from a different country or whatnot. But I think that people have to, that's sort of an educated risk to some degree, because I don't think that anyone would send their flesh and blood child over to somewhere just to be homeless.
Without a house.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So like they must have thought about this too. I mean, there's still other checks that you can do and go through things.
For sure.
As best you can.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that a lot of people are concerned with incoming students. And it's like, well, they've probably got some funds, because if they're going to UBC, last time I checked, it ain't cheap.
No.
I mean, personally, I look for family structure. Me being Asian, we do have a certain structure that we follow with the family, and if parents are going to supply the kid with money, there's rules to follow. So if they have everything in place, then I generally, tell clients it is safe, right? But it's when those are like, oh, my father-in-law or somebody, my uncle or someone is sending me money, but they can't really identify like what happens if rent stops, then those ones are usually red flags.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think we covered, a lot of the methods that people should use for any screening. Is there any ones that we haven't or missed, or that you think somebody should know about? Do you have a secret sauce?
Don't want to reveal too much.
Yeah. Right? Can't get the cow away, right? Excellent. So if anyone's looking for you guys to hire as a property manager or pick your brain, what's the best way to find y'all?
You can give me a call or email me at peter@vancouverrentit.com. Pretty straightforward. Maybe Hayes can stick the link in there somewhere.
Yeah, it'll be in the description, so it's all good.
Perfect. For myself, Ken@vancouverrentit.com.
Yeah, perfectly. Well, thank you very much. If you've gotten this far in our podcast, we really appreciate you listening. If you found anything useful, be sure to like and subscribe. And we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Thanks.